Hello everyone. So today I'm gonna talk about security topics. So this lecture covers chapter 26 of the textbook. Chapter 26 is not in the printed version or even the online version. You have to have a special access to it. But I think the slides will uh, give you enough information here. All right, so we'll start by talking about computer security. So I'm sure a lot of you heard the term network security, computer security, information security, cyber security, all of these terms. And security is in everybody's mind nowadays because of all of the uh, attacks that's happening. Organizations are concerned about their information security because information is now a significant asset to any organization, and everybody is attempting to protect their assets. On the other side, hackers or criminals are in continuous pursuit of attempt to gain access to these valuable assets, right? So when we talk about computer security, um, we are talking about all the efforts to protect information systems. Okay? Especially the when we talk about security, we mention always the integrity, availability, and confidentiality of information system resources or assets. Okay? So, what are these three things? These are the security objectives, and we know them sometimes by the acronym CIA. Or we'll call them the pillars of the security. So confidentiality here is one of the three main objectives of security. And when we talk about confidentiality, we mean that information are protected from any um, unauthorized eyes, right? So we don't want the information to be available to somebody who's not supposed to see them, so they're not disclosed to unauthorized person. Um, Another aspect of confidentiality is the privacy. So privacy means that individuals have control over their own information. Nobody can look at, for example, my home address if I don't want to disclose this information, or my phone number, or my uh, credit card information, things like that. And for organizations, this means their financial records, their plans, their you know internal documents, uh, and any trade secrets they have, etc. Okay? The other objective is the integrity of information. So information can be sometimes open to the public, but it can be modified or changed in a way that's not authorized. Example, I send you an email that says there is a quiz Monday morning, right? Somebody intercepts that email, modifies it, and instead of saying the quiz is Monday morning, it says Tuesday morning. So now everybody will be late for a quiz, right? Nobody will show up for a quiz on Monday morning. So we want the security to stop something like that from happening. Uh, Integrity applies also to systems, not just data. So we want the system to work as intended, right, and not being modified to do something different. And the third one is the availability. So an attacker may not change or look at the information, may not change it, but they may stop the system from working altogether. This means that the system, the information system, the network or the computer will stop working and it will stop providing service. So part of the information security objective is to maintain availability of the system. There are additional objectives that can be derived from the previous three. One of them is authentication or authenticity. So security systems usually are used to verify that users are authorized to access certain information, right? So you can go to Brightspace, you put your username and password, and you log into Brightspace, and you can see all of your quiz results, for example. Now, nobody else can do the same thing for your information, for your own information. So, how can the system verify it's you? That's the job of authentication. And we do that by several mechanisms. One of them is using a username and password, right? The other part, or the last part, is the accountability. Even if you are authorized to access a system, the security system should be able to trace your actions within that system to make sure that you don't abuse um, your um, your privileges, right? So let's say a system administrator has all the privileges to go and do anything, change the configuration of a computer, change, install, uninstall software, or go to the network and change the configuration. But that person could go and make a change intentionally or by mistake that disrupts the operation of the network. One of the objectives of network security, information security in general, is to be able to trace everybody's access so that we can say, well, this person did this, and either for accountability reasons or for troubleshooting reasons. We want to know who's responsible for doing uh, stuff, right? And accountability also has another aspect, which is the non-repudiation. So that means that if I, let's say, send an email and say, well, the quiz on Monday, and then later claim that, no, I didn't send you that email. It was sent by mistake, or it's not me who sent it. The information system should be able to either prove that I actually sent the email or prove otherwise. So that's what we call the non-repudiation. Another example is maybe somebody sends a bank request to transfer money from one account to another, and then later comes and say, well, who told you to transfer money from one account to another? I didn't send you that email. That email was not sent by me. So the bank has to go and find information that proves that that person has actually requested the transfer. Otherwise, everybody will say, well, transfer $1,000 to another bank and then claim that he didn't do it, right? And that will be an issue for the bank, of course. So we'll see here some of the common security attacks and threats that we need to be aware of. So some of these attacks are unauthorized disclosure. So this is attack against confidentiality. So somebody takes the information and reveal them, confidential information, hidden information, reveal them, right? So your bank account information, right? This could be exposure, could be deliberate, or by mistake, right? So credit card information stored in a database in an organization for the customers, and this information could be subject to attack. Somebody will go and take that information, or it could be by mistake that an employee leaves the information available to the public or print them on a piece of paper. Yeah. Another way that's relevant to networking is interception. So the information while in transit from one location to another, somebody intercept it in the middle and copy it, right? Copy the packets. Another way, maybe indirect way to disclose the information is to monitor the traffic, even without actually knowing what the information is. But I can see, for example, all right, this person is sending an email to this to or this type of email every morning at 8 o'clock, right? So I may infer from that 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 person starts their job at 8 in the morning, right? Um, or a large amount of data is sent from organization to a data center every week on Saturday at 3 in the morning. So I may infer from that there is a huge backup that's going. Right? So what does that mean? I may interfere with this backup, or I may plan to copy that backup right at some point. So and finally, intrusion. So intrusion refers to gaining unauthorized access to the data. Right? Another type of threats or attacks is deception. So here I can, the first type of deception is masquerading or spoofing. So the system or a person can pretend to be something else, can be an unauthorized user, can be or can pretend to be authorized user and go and obtain information by getting somebody else's credentials, right? In systems that can be done by spoofing. If you try to access Dell.ca, okay, you go to the actual website of Dalhousie University, but an attacker could design a server that pretends to be Dalhousie server and spoof you into thinking that the actual server is his server. So you are directing all of your traffic to the fake one. Falsification is the way the data altered or replaced so that it do some kind of harm. A student could go and alter their grades, right? So they give themselves extra marks, right? Or an employee go and change their records to um, erase some bad remarks about them, or give themselves a raise or extra vacation or something like that. The other or the last one of deception is the repudiation, which is the opposite of what we were trying to do. So somebody does something and then claims that they didn't do it, right? And that also harmful. as I mentioned the example, somebody says or instructs the bank to withdraw $1,000, and then they go to the bank and say, well, we never asked for this money to be withdrawn or transferred, so it must be a mistake. Give me $1,000 as compensation for the mistake, right? So that will be a form of deception. Disruption is another threat. That aims to change the normal work of a system, right, by changing availability. So I could go and damage equipment or damage a server, damage hardware, and that will stop the system from working properly. I could corrupt the software so that instead of doing normal function, it does something different. So every time a user try to transfer money from one bank account to another, a percentage of the money will go somewhere else instead of being transferred to the rightful account. Obstruction could be in a form of making the network congested so you cannot use it, overload the system so to the point that it fails. So that's different. These are all examples. Usurpation is a threat to integrity by either stealing servers. So one example is, as we will see later, the hacker can put software, malicious software in your computer, and that software will be used to launch an attack using your own computer. So this means that in a way your computer was stolen to do something else, right? And that something else is malicious. And misuse. Hacker or malicious software can be used to disable security functions or give you access, right, to, or give the attacker access that they don't deserve. Okay, so now we look at some of the threats and assets. So we need to look at the common ones. So if you look at the threats available or the threats possible from the perspective of the three main objectives of security, availability, confidentiality, and integrity, you'll see that, for example, I'm going to just pick few. You can threat the availability of the hardware by stealing it or breaking it. Right? You can threat the availability of the data by deleting databases or files. Confidentiality can be threatened by reading the information itself, decrypting it if it's encrypted, or doing some statistical analysis that reveals the content. Right? The integrity can be threatened by falsifying information. A program can be changed, software can be changed to do something that wasn't intentional. Right? So all of these are examples of the threats that can be that the assets can face, right? So here our assets are the hardware, the software, the data, and communication lines as examples. So If we take each one of them separately, you'll see that any accidental or deliberate damage to equipment is a threat. Theft is a threat. Um, if an access point, wireless access point, is installed outside to provide access to um, users in a stadium, sports stadium, and somebody steals that access point, so that means that it, some users are denied access to the network. So usually mitigations for hardware to protect the hardware is to put it behind locked doors, right? Or build fences around it, security fences, or sometimes just monitoring it by security cameras, right? So you can mitigate some of the effect. Software, you can attack the software by um, altering configuration, denying the software from booting, for example, stealing the software itself. So from a perspective of a company that produces software, anybody who pirates the software, takes it without paying, is a security attack, right? Or it could be deleted altogether. Data can be attacked also by either disclosing the data itself, disclosing the information, and that could be very harmful if you disclosed bank information for users or their medical records. That could have harmful effect. Sometimes instead of direct disclosure, I can analyze the data. I can analyze the information. For example, I could see that a lot of patients in a hospital came from a specific region, right? Or they have a specific occupation, or they have a specific uh, wealth, right? So I could analyze the data and gather information. That information, even though it's not direct information, but it could be also harmful or it could be misused. And finally, I could modify the data files, changing bank accounts to give somebody more money or take money from somebody. Um, what concerns us a lot in this program is threats to networks. And the network includes the communication links themselves and the intermediate systems, the switches, the routers, and firewalls, and all of these devices. So we could, some of the attacks on network can be passive. Passive means that I don't do an actual harm, but instead I can maybe listen to the information, monitor the system. Um, all of this is considered passive because I'm not changing anything. But by listening to the packets and maybe copying them or monitoring the behavior of the network, as I gave the example before, see that there is always uh, a huge data transfer in the middle of the night on Saturday, I may be able to figure out that, okay, so this organization is sending a huge backup files, right? So this could be used later. The passive attacks usually are a step before any active attacks. You are collecting information before before you do any active attack. Active attacks involve actually modifying the data or doing an actual harm. So examples of that is what we call replay attacks. I could take information and then replay it back. So if I give you an example, let's say I'm monitoring the network and I see instructions going from users to the bank saying transfer money from or pay that person $100, right? I capture this packet and I start sending it again. So every time I send it, this means that a new instruction that goes to the bank that says transfer money $100 to another bank, right? So that's harmful, of course. It could also be something like taking a packet and then sending it many times just to disrupt the system, just to break the system, just to overwhelm the receiver to the point that it stops working. We'll call that denial of service attacks. So I could use a huge number of packets going, either doing something um, real or fake, just so that my goal is to overwhelm the system and stop it from working. Right? The system could be a link, so it's become so congested that actual traffic from legitimate sources cannot pass any longer. Or it could be the destination. It could be I overwhelm a router with a lot of packets that the router stops functioning properly. Masquerade attacks and sometimes the spoofing attacks are aimed in gaining unauthorized, not unmortized here, unauthorized access. So there's a typo in the slide. So unauthorized access means, well, the masquerade attacks means that somebody pretends to be somebody else, right? It's either a person or a system. So we talked about an ARP request at some of the lectures, right? An ARP request is a packet that's sent from a node asking for the MAC address from another node. So one common type of attack is for a third party, somebody who that's not the router, sitting in the network and responding every time it sees an ARP request. It responds and say, well, here is my MAC, instead of letting the actual node replies, it replies on their behalf. So what is the consequence of that? The consequence of that is, instead of sending the data to the actual destination, the data is sent to this fake device. And if I am the fake device, I'll be receiving all the information from all other nodes, even though I'm not authorized to receive them. So masquerade attacks or spoofing attacks are usually another first step into doing more harm or doing more attacks. Message modification, it takes a message, modifies it, changes it. Instead of asking the bank to transfer $100, I'll ask the bank to transfer 150. Right? As you saw in previous lecture, even if I delay the packets or reorder them, I could also do harm. In the go back in protocol, for example, if the packets are not received in order, the destination will ask the transmitter, the source, to resend the packets. If I maliciously, every time I see a group of packets sent, and I'll take one and delete it or insert errors in it, so this means that the receiver will keep or asking for the sender to retransmit, which means that the network will fail eventually. Right? So in this part, we'll talk about intruders. So, what kind of intruders we have? We see some of these concepts repeat themselves, by the way. So the first one, masquerader. So masquerading is a threat. Masquerader is the person or the system that does the masquerading, right? So we see some of the concepts being repeated here. So the masquerader is the person who is pretending to be somebody else, right? How? By circumventing system access. So if the router can be accessed only by an administrator with certain privileges, but then another person steals the username and password of the administrator and go access the router. Well, in that case, she is not the right person, so she is masquerading. Okay? A common type of attack is to attack a system, logging into the system as a regular user, and then gain access as an administrator. So this is usually a goal of many attacks, to find the vulnerability, find somebody's account, right? And then once you gain that somebody's account, which could be a normal user or user without high privileges, but then once I get access to the system, I can escalate, so I can gain access to a higher privileges. Misfeasor is a user that has legitimate access to resources, but it uses them in unauthorized access, or misuses their privilege. So let's say I have access to your grades. I can see them, right? But I can take those grades and publish them. In that case, I misused my privileges. I was trusted with this information. I was given access to this information, but I misused it for malicious purpose, right? Clandestine user is the one who seizes supervisory control of a system and uses it to control or evade or suppress auditing. So let's say um, a user, it changes the behavior of the system, but then they want to hide their tracks. As we saw, some of the goals of the information security is accountability. So we can trace what everybody does, so we can spot who's the blame for any misuse. So if I try actively to circumvent this, to go and remove the logs, for example, I do something, I change something, I erase a file, and then I go to the logs that says I erase the file and delete those logs, so that nobody find out who deleted the original file. So that's a type of threat intruders. So if you take all of these three different intruders, what they can do, so somebody can go to Dalhousie website and change the information on it, right? So that we'll call defacing a web server. And these type of attacks, sometimes it happens, hackers go to a website of a known company and change the information on the website. Guessing or cracking passwords. So if I attack a system to be able, or collect a lot of information from a system to be able to figure out what the passwords are. So once I have a password, I may be able to access bank accounts, for example. Disclosing any sensitive information, credit card, for example, or payroll information or medical records. Distributing malicious software for other purposes that we will see later. Gaining unauthorized access to networks and systems. All of these are considered intrusions. So who are the intruders? We call them different names. The hacker is common name. So hackers probably an old term that initially referred to people who are actually very smart, very good. They can do things that other people cannot do. And it was a compliment for somebody to be called a hacker. But then the hacker became somebody who's probably doing something that they shouldn't be doing, right? So, and they are pushing the limits. So, original hackers were people who are trying to show off or show their skills, right? And maybe they're not harmful, but they still disrupt or they do consume resources. When hackers move from being benign and doing just some fun stuff to actually disrupting the work, now they're becoming criminals, right? If you steal information, if you disrupt behavior of a system, if you are um, gaining financial advantage, then you are stealing, right? So criminals, what they do, they either seek financial gains, or sometimes there are the, you know, what they call them, hacktivists. Hacktivists are sort of hackers. They are trying to have a political point, right? So they may go and deface um, a website of a company that, in their view, it's not ethical company, so that they they try to um, maybe expose it to the public for some political motivations. Criminals usually more organized and resourceful, and now they are becoming more and more organized. They are running as a business rather than just hiding in the shadows, right? And there are the insiders. There are people who are maybe employees in a company, or people that are trusted, but at some point they use this trust to seek revenge, or because they think that they are entitled to the information, to the resources, right? So for example, somebody who was working in a company, and then when she moves to another company, she takes with her all customer information to share with her new employer. That's is not ethical and considered criminal behavior or illegal behavior, because you're not supposed to disclose information from one company to another. Um, Sometimes employee feels like they were terminated uh, unfairly, so they go and seek revenge by disrupting the work of the company that they just left. These are the hardest to detect because they are insiders. They work from the inside, right? So they're not coming from the outside. We have a lot of countermeasures for intrusion, and some of these we will study them in the future courses, and especially in the security course. So something called intrusion detection systems. These systems are designed to monitor the network and try to figure out any what is the abnormal behavior. If there is any abnormal behavior, they flag it, they alert the administrator. Abnormal behavior may be um, or unexplained um, increase in traffic to a certain server, right? Or multiple attempts to access a device. So that could be considered abnormal behavior, and intrusion detection systems are designed to detect that. Um, Another way to do countermeasures is to give everybody the least amount of privilege that they need to do their job. Right? So instead of giving everybody access to the routers and networks and switches in the network, we'll say only one person can change configuration, right? Everybody else, maybe they can log in, they can look at the configuration, they maybe, if their job requires maybe managing the network, so that they can look at the configuration, but they cannot change it, right? So by restricting access and giving people only the amount of access that they need, we prevent a lot of problems. Right? Keeping access logs. So again, as matter of accountability, we log all the changes in the system. Any information that's sensitive should be encrypted and should be access to it should be authenticated. So you need to know the 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 grades of a student. You have to have authority to access that. It's not just every instructor in the program can go and look at your grades. No, only the instructor that's responsible for the course, right? And this information is privileged, and it's not that we go and look at everybody's data. If somebody is leaving an organization, then before even they are informed of leaving, maybe their accounts can be disabled so that they cannot do harm once they know that they're leaving the organization. So we talked about malicious software before, so we have a lot of examples of malicious software or malware. And this software in general is designed to cause damage. Often it's not like you see it in your computer and say, okay, I'm gonna uninstall it. No, it's concealed. And often it has the ability to spread itself from one system to another, so that create more harm. We categorize this malware into two categories: parasitic, which means that it needs a host program. It doesn't work on its own, or sometimes it's independent. The software itself can work on its own. All right, so we have here a list of them: virus, worm, logic bomb, Trojan horse, backdoor, mobile code, exploits, auto router, kit, spammer, flooder, keyloggers, rootkit, zombie or bot, spyware, adware. Each one of these has special characteristics. They all have a common characteristic, which is trying to do harm. We're going to talk about some of them in detail. So first one is a virus. Virus is probably the oldest type of malware out there. It was created, or the type of virus created long time ago. Sometimes often by researchers, just to want to demonstrate that software can be used to do some harm as well, and to alert people to be careful, but then actually started to be used to do actual harm. So the virus in general is a piece of software that hides itself inside another program or inside the file. So you don't see it in the open. It hides as a program. It's a sequence of bytes, sequence of code, right? Instructions that the CPU can understand and execute. So this sequence can be inserted in a piece of software, another piece of software, or in a file. And one of the main characteristics of a virus is it can replicate itself. We'll call that infection, right? So infection means that the software is added, the malicious software, the virus is added to a normal program. And then one of the things that the virus does is to copy itself to another program. So you may have, if the software, if the virus infects your computer, it may be infecting multiple programs. So it keeps copying itself to other programs. And even if you delete one or replace one software, it's still in another software. So it is annoying and it's a hassle. So the virus does, or it has three parts: the infection mechanism or the infection vector. So this is how the virus is spreading itself or copying itself. The virus is not just copying itself. The virus is supposed to do some harm. So it needs a trigger mechanism. So what makes it activate? What makes it do the harm? So that's a trigger. And then finally, the actual harm, the actual part or the instructions that does the harm. For example, the virus may be instructed to delete files. So that will be the harmful part. So the life cycle of a virus starts from being dormant, so it doesn't do anything. And it's called virus actually because there is a similarity between the virus of computer virus and the actual biological virus. Both of them are not alive, right? So they're not alive until they get into a live system. So the virus is idle, and then it clones itself. That's the second cycle. And it may clone itself many times inside the system before it does anything or before anybody notices. So if it starts doing harm immediately, the user will notice, but it propagates itself first, and then there is a trigger phase, something that will trigger. It could trigger by opening, if I open a file, that triggers the virus. Or it can be triggered by a date. So we call that a logic bomb, actually, to differentiate it from other types of viruses. So it waits for a specific date or specific time, and then once that time comes, it starts doing its harm. So that leads to the execution phase, which is where the actual harm is done. So if I want to classify the virus by target, so some viruses target the boot sector. So infects the boot sector. When you boot the computer, the first thing that the computer does is to go to the boot sector, boot record, to grab the very first instructions. Right? If I damage that part, then, or change it, then my system will not be normal, will not be activated normally. It could infect a file, specific file, so that's an executable, for example. So every time I run that regular application, the virus will start doing whatever it's supposed to be doing. There are viruses that are embedded in macros. if you use Excel or use Microsoft Word or use some of these, you can automate some of the some of the functions of Excel spreadsheet using macros. So these are programs, application-specific programs that are designed to uh, speed up some tasks. So the virus may embed itself on these macros. So every time you start an Excel spreadsheet and you hit or you try to execute that macro, the virus activates. Viruses can be also classified by how they conceal themselves. So the virus could be encrypted. It encrypts itself. So you don't know what the content of the virus or what the software is supposed to be doing. If you look at just the code of the virus, you can see the instructions. So you know what it's supposed to be doing, right? So you probably, if you see series of instructions that delete all the files in your computer, you know that this software is harmful. But if it encrypts itself or part of itself, then you won't see what it's supposed to be doing. So that's a concealed virus. Stealth is the virus that's designed to hide itself from detection by antivirus software. So antivirus software use different detection techniques. One of them is to look for byte codes or the byte sequence, or we call it signature, right? The signature of the virus is just a code. If I look at the code and I see every virus, I can identify it by the code that it does, right, or it uses, and that if I pick a part of the code and use it to identify the virus, I'm gonna call that the signature. The virus could hide itself by changing its code. So the antivirus software will never figure out what is the signature, the actual signature of the virus. It could hide itself also from the tools that we use. So the task manager in Windows, for example, it shows you all the applications that are running on your computer. A virus obviously doesn't want to be seen in the task manager, so it hides itself. Polymorphic virus is the virus that mutates every time, so it hides its signature. As I said, you can identify the virus by its code, but if the code of the virus changes all the time, every time the virus copies itself, it makes slight changes, so automated antivirus tools cannot detect it. And there is the metamorphic virus, which is a virus that rewrites itself and rewrites itself. It could be rewrites itself by arranging the code itself, but the behavior stays the same, just scrambles instructions a little bit. Or the virus may change behavior every time it writes itself. These are, things that are, or viruses that's supposed to do maximum harm. Maybe it picks a random folder in your computer and erases it, or picks a random location in the memory and change it. So it just does harm in a random way. Worms are viruses that can replicate themselves across networks. So a virus may not replicate itself across computers. It may replicate itself inside a computer itself, one computer. But worms, they have the ability to go from one computer to another if they are connected, right? So how it could use the email. So every time you send an email to somebody, the worm attaches itself to the email, so it travels through email to another system. It could implement remote execution. So remote execution means that it executes a program remotely. So it copies itself this way. It could apply remote login. So instead of you logging in to another device, the worm itself logs in to another device and copies itself. Right? Worms can be multi-platform, so they can attack multiple platforms, Windows, Linux, etc. So they're not just restricted to one operating system. They can be multi-exploit, so they penetrate the system in a variety of ways, not just email or not just remote login, but multiple ways, so they can maximize the way they can infect. Worms can do ultra fast spreading. So how worms work actually? They try to scan the network to see what are the targets, right? Before it may be a worm in your LAN, in your computer in a LAN. So it tries to scan who else or what devices are residing in the same LAN. So it tries to collect their IP addresses before it starts doing the attack, right? And the polymorphic worms are the ones that can change their code so that they always evade detection. All the antivirus, anti-worm, or anti-malware detection software rely on the fact that there is a signature, there is a specific pattern in the code for each one of these viruses or worms and try to find it. But if now the worms are getting smarter, they change that signature so they evade detection. Metamorphic, we saw that before with the viruses, same as viruses, they change their appearance and they change their behavior. Transport vehicles, so worms that are used to launch other attack tools such as denial of service bots. We'll talk about this later, but these are worms that by themselves they don't do harm, but they are used to install another software that does the harm, right? And finally, we have something called the zero-day exploit. So zero-day exploit, not just specific to worms, but it's a term that is or applied to anything that it's still unknown to the security people, right? So security peoples are in constant search for any vulnerabilities, any um, code that's not written well enough, so it has vulnerability. It has um, a weakness that can be exploited. Right? So there is always the battle between the good guys and the bad guys. The good guys try to find any weaknesses in the operating systems, in the applications, in the network, and try to close them. See a problem, okay, find a solution for it, and talk to everybody about it so that they can protect themselves. The attackers, on the other hand, try to find the vulnerabilities, and sometimes they find a vulnerability that the security people did not find yet. So they immediately exploit it, they immediately take advantage of that. So, from the point of view of the security people, that's a 0 day. That's 0 day means we had no warning before. It came out of the blue, so to speak. So, we didn't see it before. It is just we learned about it now, right? So, these are one of the most worrisome and most dangerous exploits because they are not known before. If I had known about a vulnerability, I could fix it. If it's a piece of software, I could prevent it in another way, by using security systems. But this is something that I haven't seen before, so it's very hard to protect against it. A bot is a program that secretly take over any any network attached computer and use it to launch attacks on other systems. Right? So how is that? Let's say I want to generate a lot of traffic to attack a server to disable that server. So that's a denial of service attack. But how can I generate a lot of traffic? If I uh, if I send all the traffic from my computer to the target server, well, first, it's very hard to generate a lot of traffic from one computer. Second, the defender may look at the traffic coming from one computer, so it's easy to block that IP address and say, well, stop receiving any information. So I could go to a firewall and disable or block that IP address, right? So it's not useful strategy. So the strategy that attackers use is to employ a lot of devices to in one instant or when it triggered, all of them they start sending traffic to the target. So they disable the target by traffic coming from many computers, and the defender will be having a hard time to stopping that because it's coming from many directions. They could stop the system altogether, but that's actually the goal that the attacker wants, right? So stopping the system from working. So how does the attacks happen? The first stage of this such attack is to send worms or viruses, try to infect as many systems as possible. Every virus or worm that infects the system downloads a piece of software that is supposed to generate the traffic. And then they all wait for a trigger. They wait for somebody to tell them, now start. So when that happens, all these systems will start sending traffic. So your computer may be hosting one of these bots without being aware of it, right? So, and it may be participating in this harmful without you knowing. So the collection of bots is referred to as botnet, and we will see. I already explained how it's work, but we'll see the slides here. So the uses of bots, one of them is the denial of service attack, which I just described. Another use is spamming, sending massive amount of spam or bulk mail. Spam is annoying form of advertisement, but sometimes is even more harmful than that. So spam, probably you have seen it. Somebody is trying to sell drugs or sell sometimes just components or like advertising some merchandise. It's the least, at least it's annoying. It fills your mailbox with useless email, but sometimes the spam itself is used to spread viruses. So spam comes from a lot of directions, and one of the uses of bots is to generate such spam. Bots can be also used to sniff traffic. So if your computer is infected with bots, right? The bot can start sniffing traffic coming from computer and another bot sniffing traffic from another computer. By sniffing all traffic, sniffing means capturing or copying the traffic. By doing all of this and sending the information somewhere, the receiver will be able to receive sensitive information. Okay. Keyloggers, we have seen them as one of the examples of malicious software, but the keyloggers the software that tries to monitor the keyboard. Every time you type in keyboard, it collects the keystrokes. And of course, when you're typing a lot of things. You're maybe typing private information, private email. You may be typing your username and password to many devices. So if this information is collected from your computer and sent somewhere else, somebody can receive this information, analyze it, and figure out your sensitive information. Bots can be used themselves to spread malware. So as I said before, it's a vehicle to do more harm. So it can be used to send viruses. Sometimes it can be used to install ads or add-ons, right? So you notice sometimes that you go every time you open your browser, you see advertisements um, about all kind of products, and the advertisements sometimes just want you to generate so you want by mistake or intentionally you say, oh, nice, I want to click on this, see what's all about. Some of the advertisers pay by the number of clicks. So this way, the more clicks on an ad, the more. So it's sort of a gray area between legitimate and illegitimate way of advertisement. So a company wants to advertise its product. It hires a company that does the advertisement, and they say, you know what, we will pay you by the number of clicks. The more user click on the ad, the more we pay you because we want people to see it. Okay, so legitimate advertisers will try many ways to spread the word as much as possible. But if they are crossing the from legitimate to illegitimate, they may use bots to send these ads to your computer so that they illegally advertise. Right? Bots in general use something called IRC, Internet Relay Chat. It's a protocol that's supposed to allow or a chat network, right? You can look it up. It used to be very common. Now it's less common. But bots usually use this kind of networks to communicate. They can be also used to manipulate online polls. So voting, for example. So the bot resides on your computer and it goes and vote on your behalf on different polls. Not all polls are serious. Sometimes they just ask for opinions, but still these can be manipulated. So it will weigh one opinion over another, or it gives false information. Bots, as I mentioned, they reside in a computer and waits for instructions coming. So if I want to launch a denial of service attack, I install bots in very large number of computers, and then I send them instruction, specific time, specific date, start sending traffic. So that means that the bot needs control from a central facility. One of the uses for the central facility is the IRC server, but other protocols can be used as well, like HTTP. So these bots will be always monitoring a certain website for instruction to start, right? This slide gives more detail on how bots are working. So first, I will start infecting a large number of machines. How? Well, figure out first the software, the bot software, that I need software that can run on as many machines as possible. So, of course, machines are not always the same operating system. Some Windows, different versions, some Mac, different versions, some Linux, different versions and different distributions. So I want software that works on as many machines as possible. How can I deliver that software? Well, first of all, I need to know vulnerability. So it's not like I am sending the software and expecting the computer to say, welcome, right? So I have to exploit some vulnerability in the operating system, in the system itself. So if the email is not secure, I may send it through email. If the login system is not secure, I may send it through a remote login, any way possible. So I need to know the vulnerability. I also need to know where are the vulnerable machines. So I may be I need to do scanning. If I am in a network, I need to scan the network, and with each scan, first I need to find who is in the network, and second, if they are vulnerable or not, if they have that weakness or not. So the scanning strategies can be random. So I know that I have an IP address space of 255 nodes. I can select randomly 100 of these or 50 of these, depends on what is the size. So random out of 255, and then start attacking these. Or I could have compiling a long list of vulnerable machines. So I scan slowly the network, find out which machines are vulnerable, accumulate this information, and then I have a list that I use to attack. I could use topological, so I attack a network, and that network is connected to another network. So in a hierarchical manner, I go from one network to another to another. Or if I am inside a network, I can target the local machines and local networks. So I could use actually all of these as combined to hit as many targets as possible, right? So that's all we need to know in this introduction to security. In um, the next set of slides, the next lecture will talk about some legal and standards to help with security. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.